So you might be thinking, why am I doing Season 1 again? Well, that's because I didn't get the chance to review the movies that I skipped over. Secondly, I couldn't stand what I was before, I gotta be honest with you. Like, the first time I ever done these kind of reviews, I was a bit rough. So, in addition to the ongoing YouTube novels, Season 1 of the Brumakian podcast is not only getting remastered, but the season itself is getting an extension, all the way up to Godzilla 2 King of the Monsters. Godzilla vs. Kong in Season 2 will be left untouched. And because I've been working hard on my second channel, Brumakian Games, for the last few weeks, as soon as this Elgato does what I wanted to do,
I want you to work, you stupid piece of shit!
I've decided to continue the podcast into its third season, but it still has a working title. Anyway, the remastered extended Season 1 edition of the Remastered podcast begins now, not with the original Godzilla, but where I left off. This is Godzilla Raids Again. Oh, and also, the song Roar by Mian Kurosaki, yeah, I cannot play that anymore. Out of fear that YouTube might come into my house and pull up Pulp Fiction on me. So, anyway, enjoy the show. They say that sequels, for the most part, never live up to the original film, and you may be right, but there are some exceptions. For example, Godfather Part 2, The Empire Strikes Back, and even X-Men 2 from 2004. But once again, sequels, for the most part, missed the mark that the original had created, or did something else and ignored the original altogether. Well, in the case of Godzilla, the creators did not ignore the original. In fact, what happens in this movie will set a standard for this franchise and other franchises for years to come. But its first venture that created that standard is a bit rough, to say the least. Welcome to the Brumakian podcast, an episodic review series where I can review anything but not everything. On this show, I cover anything in entertainment, whether it be giant monster movies, anime, and video games.
It feels so good to finally say that. Holy shit.
Sorry about that. I was going through some emotions. Anyway, when we last left off, Godzilla had been released on November 3rd, 1954, and it was a massive hit. Despite critical pandering at the time, it, along with Seven Samurai, also by Toho, will over time become the most legendary films in history and one of the most important movies in the genre. Godzilla had pioneered everything: the effects, the monster himself, the character interactions with said monster, and a story that is still relevant even 9 years after the war. The movie's budget was over 183 million yen, sold over 9.6 million tickets, and made over $2.8 million in Japan. Even 2 years later in the United States, with its Americanized version, Godzilla King of the Monsters, 1956 edition, it made over $2 million with US rentals at the box office. In the East and in the West, Godzilla was the result of hard work, dedication, and care. And here is what happened next. Because he was pleased with how Godzilla performed at the box office, in a welcome home party for executive producer Aomori, he told the producer of the film, Tomoyuki Tanaka, to create a sequel. But there's a little problem. If you remember, Godzilla died at the end of the movie. Ishiro Honda, the movie's director, said in an interview, "Believe it or not, we had no plans and naively hoped that the end of Godzilla would coincide with the end of nuclear tests. Godzilla had a time frame of only a few months. The time frame for making the sequel? 5 months. Nevertheless, the sequel was greenlit and the team behind the original was brought back to produce it. Except there are a few key players that are missing. In fact, 2 of them. One of them is Ishiro Honda himself. Honda could not come on to direct this new sequel due to him at the time directing another film called Love Tide. In his place is director Motoyoshi Oda. Oda was born in Fukuoka in 1909 and has been a director since 1935. His well-known films are The Lady from Hell and The Invisible Avenger. Some Japanese publications believe that producer Tanaka chose Oda rather than wait for Honda because they didn't want to lose most of the momentum of the original film. Film historians David Kallett and Steve Rifle deduced that Oda was chosen because of his experience with effects-driven films. Kallett even added that putting such a man in charge of the Godzilla sequel then was a clear signal of intent. This was to be a quickie profit center, not an artistic indulgence. And the effect shows. Well, not really. On April 24th, 1955 in Japan, Godzilla Raids Again, or Godzilla's Counterattack, was released, selling 8.9 million tickets and making over 170 million yen in Japanese rentals. Is it really that bad as everyone remembers it? Monstrosities thinks it is. Well, let's take a look at that plot synopsis. Yeah, instead of me going over the plot, I'm saving you some time for my sanity and your sanity. So, the plot synopsis goes as follows. Fishing scout pilots are startled to discover a new monster named Anguirus alongside a second Godzilla. The monsters make their way towards Osaka as Japan can only brace for tragedy and relive the horror of Godzilla once more. See? That was easy. Now, let's get into my actual final thoughts on the movie. The first of many disappointments. Well, okay, to be fair, this movie introduced the concept of giant monsters fighting in an urban area, and it does set the standard for future movies to come. However, as a movie by itself, yikes. I think that it is no secret that it pales in comparison to the original. That one is obvious. The humans do have brighter personalities, sure, but none of them sticks out aside from Kobayashi, who is trying to make the best out of the worst situation. Everyone else is just bland. Hiroshi Koizumi, God rest his soul, does get better in later films, especially outside of Godzilla, but for his first outing, he could have done better in his role. Oh, and speaking of characters that should have been done better, let's talk about Anguirus for a minute. Anguirus is a bit of a letdown. After he was grilled to medium rare by Godzilla, he's just forgotten. Sure, he has a cool design, but the second monster in a giant monster movie should have an equal amount of focus as the first. And speaking of the first, let's talk about him. We have a new Godzilla roaming around, and this will be the monster that we will follow for the rest of the era until 1975. His design is inferior. Okay, if you look at him at the side, he looks intimidating. However, if you look at him dead on, he looks like he just got shit-faced the previous night. As far as the effects go, they are on par with the original, for the most part. Once again, I appreciate that this is the first time that we see a giant monster battle, and it will become a staple. The way that it was shot is a different story. I'm not talking about the choreography where they fight like actual animals. I'm talking about the camera work to shoot the scene. It's bad. Really bad. The puppet didn't help much either. In the original, the camera is set to record Haru Nakajima in the Godzilla suit at a fast speed. When the camera is edited and reverted back to normal speed, the monster appears to be moving more slower. The same technique is applied here. However, one of the camera guys set a camera to slow speed, so when it was reverted back to normal speed, the movie suddenly looks like a lost Charlie Chaplin film. Lastly, there is the music. Akira Ifukube, just like Honda, wasn't available to make the score, so Masaru Sato was brought in. Like Koizumi, he does get better at his work, especially with 1974, but his score for Godzilla Raids Again leaves a lot to be desired. Although my personal favorite has to be Flares and Godzilla. Overall, Godzilla Raids Again is a very disappointing movie for me. Now, here's how I rate things. It is not on the scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. It's 0 to 100. With that said, because it introduces the giant monster fighting formula, later films would improve on it. As of now, Godzilla Raids Again does not score any higher than 56 speedy cameras out of 100. See you next time when we take a massive bird to anger management. Until then, this has been Dimitri signing off, and I need to find a fighter jumpsuit.
Someone get me on the USS Forrestal!